the April edition of the McKinney Amateur Radio Club, Inc. 501c3 corporation, monthly meeting. So let's go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. So I'm WW2 CBI, your communications director, trustee. And so status of the repeaters for Fairview. Well, things are starting to gel. We're doing our third site visit this week. We're going to do another drone video on the coax, Cat 6 and conduit atop the tower and inside the tower, underneath the cap, all the way up the ladder and to the conduit penetrations, because we didn't have details on that. And we don't want to go up twice, just once, right? So we got to have all the parts, all the supplies, everything approved. Preliminary approval for 2 conduits has been received from the tower to the hut. So their PE is given instructions of how they want it done. I won't go into it. Anyway, that's fine. Climber resource has been found that's approved by the town. Electrical subcontractor registered with the town also been identified. The MOU with the town, I'd asked them to get it to me a couple days ago, and they were really trying, but it's not quite done. They're really busy, and I'm sure they're busier now with the storm. So it'll be another few days before we get to see it. But I want to get it to the board for review and have it for the board meeting this Saturday, so we can start our review. So this UHF repeater, has a donated pair from another ham to the club, plus some equipment. And it's to run DMR along with its modes. And so I've identified a technical solution, which probably the members already know about, an MMDVM module for that. So I got to design that in. So that's good. And we're sending updates to the coordinated frequency pair owner now about every couple weeks as things are really starting to heat up. Keep him posted. We've got 6 volunteers, liaison coordinators now on the project for various functions. So that's moving along. National Weather Service. Well, we've identified a backhaul link from the Melissa repeater via the internet over microwave via a member's QTH that's close to the Melissa Tower. And so in bad weather or power failure or something, whatever that might happen, we'll have a backup. Also allow us to help get it up and running between the 2 VMSs, between Park and the National Weather Service and the Melissa site. So we don't have 3 things to fix at once. We just have 2, and that'll be easier. So I'm kind of excited about that. It's a conceptual proposal stage right now. I'm just hoping Murphy's Law that stays clear, BHF 75380, it seems to be operating well. It seems it'll be up after the storm. I'll need to go check the pond inside, clear that out again. Melissa, that seemed to have got through the storm just fine as well. We've also got electrical upgrades, the materials list draft coming from our electrical coordinator for Melissa, 75380, and task list for Fairview. So we got a lot of moving parts there. And then one other thing. Let me reset. So when you're working on equipment, repeaters, power amps, low noise amplifiers, tuning duplexers, you've got to have really accurate frequency. Sure, everybody use a GPS. I got a rubidium atomic clock. Can discipline it if I need to. Voltmeters, yeah. So I've got a 7-digit voltmeter. No big deal anymore. current comes along with it. The one thing you don't have is power, RF power. How do you know precision RF power? Well, I got lucky. This is an HP internal calibration unit for power at 1.000 milliwatt. And it was checked in a Cal lab before it was sent to me. It's also at 50 megahertz on a oven controlled crystal oscillator. It's not as accurate as a rubidium or anything. It's about 10 to the minus eighth or so. But anyway, absolutely fantastic. I've talked to the guy I got it from in Australia. Yeah, the shipping costs twice as much as the unit. And nobody quite knew what it was because it's not in. I went through every catalog from 1971 to 2002, matching date codes and whatnot on printed circuit boards and parts. So it's internal. It's what they use probably in manufacturing. So it's been in production like maybe 24 to 29 years. I'm not sure. This is serial number 209 with a date code of 2002. And they weren't making the unit that this was initially designed for after about 1999. So it's fantastic. So this gives me the precision to last the third leg of the stool. There's more legs, but anyway, third leg of the stool is the allegory for adjusting test equipment and working on the gear. Because I don't have the stuff Mike Baker has, you know, but now I do. So, and the club gets the benefit. So I'm really jazzed. Anyway, there we go.
Thanks so much, Ron. We know there's a lot of work going on here. Gee whiz, I don't know why I even stood up. Mike, we need you up here. Yeah, I ripped your slides apart. You're going to have to live with what you got.
2.5 months away. Can you believe it? The weather's already. Never mind. Enjoy the weather we got before we get to field day. So June 22nd, 23rd, but something, which one do I push? This one? Oh, okay. Something's coming up before then. Oh, I got to change hats. POTA! Through the brilliant mind of our treasurer, Robert Keister, we're going to have a club get-together, a club POTA get-together at Bonham State Park, which is about 45 minutes away from where we are right now. Straight up 121 up this way towards Bonham. It's easy to get to, but let Siri tell you how. The third weekend of April is one of the quarterly POTA Support Your Parks weekends. The POTA organization does this every quarter, and people will be activating parks throughout the world, literally, on this weekend. Rob thought that POTA and Field Day have so much in common. The exchange, the skills used for both are pretty much identical, and it'd be great practice for Field Day. And it'll be a fun club get together. So you should have a flyer here that's going to talk about the get together. Myself and Rob and Steve. Is Steve here? I don't see Steve. There'll be at least 3 stations set up. You're welcome to bring your station. Come see what we use for POTA. Come try out what you've got, or come use what you've got for POTA. We're going to make contacts using the club call sign, the W5MRC. But you will also get credit for the contacts you make. We'll enter the club call sign in, and then your call sign in is the operator. One thing you do need to do is get on the POTA website if you haven't already and register your call sign. You may be surprised to see that you've already got some contact credits, some 100 credits on there already. But that's real easy to do. So get on there before you do that. Create that account. And it's also that weekend. There's another organization that I think has been around a little longer than the big POTA organization called Texas State POTA. It's their big weekend of the year also. So their goal is to activate Texas State Parks, and Bonham State Park is one of them. So we're going to kind of do a dual thing here on activating the park. We're going to see how many contacts we can make throughout the country or the world and get some good experience for y'all. Again, these skills are transferable straight into field day. So it's great practice. And I guarantee you, it will not be 95 degrees out there on February 20th. Okay. We may be 80 something, but we may be getting used to it. So, Bonham State Park, we have the pavilion at the park reserve, the picnic pavilion. So, as you come into the park, look for we'll have the club banner up, and that'll be at the entrance to the pavilion parking lot. There is a $4 fee for entry for a state park. Can't get around that. Unless you've got, if you're a POTA guy, you've probably got a state park pass that gets you in for free. You still have to check in either at the booth or at the headquarters. This park is so small, they don't always man the booth. So it's a pretty small park. It's going to be a lot of fun. We will be doing hot hamburgers, hot dog. I hear rumor that one of our new members is bringing something good to eat also. So you should not go away empty either. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Any questions on the 420 event? All right. All right. Field day. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Dave.
All right.
Got a lot of hats to wear around here. All right. Field day. Hilltop Pavilion at Irwin Park, where we were 2 years ago. Board of directors have selected a new antenna. Got more on that. We're looking for CW operators. Larry is pounding the brass like crazy getting there. And some of you others are taking the CWAPS class. That's great. We're looking into message handling to get some more points. It's not a contest. But we especially need lots of volunteers. That's where y'all come in. Juan, this will be a great event for you in the summertime. So it's a fun event for everybody. There's our new antenna. It just arrived at our president's home the other day. It's not even out of the box yet, still shiny. So we'll be taking that up. That'll give us some great 40-meter capability for when the sun goes down to get our signal out on top of those 30-foot towers and dominate and get a bunch of contacts. I know it's not a contest. All right. They have announced the t-shirts for field day this year. They're a beautiful green color. Jerry's ordering 6 or 7 of them because she loves that color. I will be taking orders. I've got a sign up list back there where I'm sitting. The price did go up this year. They're $25 a piece. So I'll be making a club order. If you're interested, I'll have the sign up here and at the 420 event. And what I'll probably do is do 2 orders, do an order right after that, and then take orders again in May for those who missed them. But cash or check, make a check to me, and we'll get those ordered and to you way before field day. Any questions on field day or the POTA event? Yes, sir.
Just a note for you on POTA event. Anybody, you're a veteran, you get a park pass for free.
Cool. That's even better. That's even better. But if you're a veteran, for those of you on Zoom, if you can get a Texas State Park Pass for free. If you're not like I am, $70 a year, get you a Texas State Park Pass. If you're doing POTA, I blow through that in about 2 months. So, so it's all good. All right. Looking forward to it. Lewis. Okay. 2 purposes. The POTA aspect is to make as many contacts as you can make. Now, this is kind of a contest, but not really, but it's a fun event. Also, the dual purpose is to get as many people on the air and exposed to the POTA activities as possible and get that fever spread around. Because once you start doing POTA and getting out in the field doing HF, it's a terrible disease. It'll cost you money, time, but you'll have more fun than you've ever had, in my opinion, in ham radio. And this is to get everybody who, if you've never done POTA, this will get you exposed to it and show you what POTA is and what other people use. I'll have my rig. Robert will have his. If you've done POTA, it'll give you time to look at other people's rigs and how they do POTA and borrow ideas from each other, which I've done a lot. Thanks to many of you in here. I've got some great ideas on how to do things and how to my equipment and set up stuff like that. And it's just going to be a good day of fun. You're hanging out, informal, hamburgers, hot dogs. We'll have, Gatorade and stuff like that. Talking ham radio, talking everything in the world and getting on the radio some.
What this field day is my youngest to get his license. You got to sit down and spend 30 minutes and contact 3 or 4 different people across the country.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a good deal. And the beauty of POTA field days once a year, you can do POTA 365 days a year if your spouse will let you. Mine only lets me kind of go about once a week. So, but that's the other hat I have to wear. Any more questions? Thank y'all very much.
All right, so it's time for our presentation for the month of April. And as usual, our Vice President, Larry, has done a fantastic job of gathering up a great resource for us. Unfortunately, what we have discovered after a few years of trying to get Joseph H. Taylor Jr. to present to us is he is retired from presenting. We come to find out we really weren't paying very close attention, but he's 83 years old. He's done like a lot of presentations. But what he did agree to do for us was he sent us a link to a Vimeo video of a presentation he did just last year that will go into some of the innards of WSJTX, the very, very popular digital mode software. And he'll go very deep into FT8 and what is it, QT65, I think. He'll talk about those two protocols in particular because those are some of the two most used protocols within his and his team's software. Because he did not write the software on his own. It's him and a number of other and 3 other hams actually wrote the software. You will be fascinated to find out the languages that they used and the challenges that they had to overcome to figure out how to make this kind of thing work. I'm going to give you just a really, really short bio. This is going to be the first presentation, either in person, recorded, or whatever, that the McKinney Amateur Radio Club has ever had from a Nobel laureate. Joe Taylor actually won the Nobel Prize in 1993 as a co-recipient with Russell Hulse. I don't know about you guys, but I know Hulse. And they won for a joint discovery of the first binary pulsar ever. So Joe has a heavy background in ham radio, but believe it or not, that was not his college or what he majored in. So he'll tell you some more about that in the presentation, but I think it's kind of interesting that this whole idea of WSJTX and everything grew out of his interest in the hobby and not necessarily out of his professional accomplishments. So it's pretty darn cool. So what we're going to do, we're going to listen to listen and view the presentation. Joe did a Q&A at the end of the presentation that took about 20 minutes. And when I reviewed that, most of the questions were really, 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 really specific things that like software developers would want to know about and the like. So we've trimmed that out of this presentation to try to keep it to only about an hour. However, what we'll do is at the end of the night, we'll have a QR code that you can use to get to the full presentation if you want to see the Q&A that's at the end. All right, Sean, can you get us fired up?
keying. We, after all, are in the digital age, so it would be fun to use some of those digital techniques, the same kinds of coding and encoding of information, encoding and decoding that is used in all kinds of digital apparatus these days, and it'd be fun to apply some of those to ham radio. So that was kind of what I had in mind, and I was taking it as a challenge to push the fundamental limits of weak signal communication. Let's see, really how well we can do this. So those were among the motivations and the goals. A few words about how. So what have you got to play with if you're going to be a protocol designer and think about how you would, imagine setting up a scheme of information exchange that could be used for making ham-type QSOs. You have the information throughput rate that you can play with, and right away you probably already know that if you want to do it with weaker and weaker signals, the information throughput rate is going to have to decrease. So that means that either QSOs are going to take a long time, or you are going to have to send the information in a very efficient way for a somewhat shorter time. So we're going to balance those kinds of criteria. If we put some constraints on the message format, we can make it easier on the decoding end to figure out what's being received. And so all of the modes in WSJTX have constraints on message format. That basically standard messages include 2 call signs, the call sign you're talking to, then your own call sign, and then in the third word position, if you like, normally a standard message will include either your grid locator, which you normally send in the first couple of transmissions, or a signal report, or maybe a Roger plus a signal report to indicate that you've already got his signal report, or maybe just Roger or 73. And those things basically all fit into the third word. So it's a very constrained message. These messages also allow any arbitrary message to be sent, any arbitrary combination of letters, numbers, a few punctuation marks and spaces, but only up to 13 characters. So you can't say very much in 13 characters, but you can say 73 Bob or something a little bit more than that, but not very much more. So that all can be made to work by using a technique known as source encoding. That is, you're going to encode the source information, the information that is going to be conveyed in your message, in a way that is sort of analogous to what happens when you use the program known as zip, which compresses a file on your hard drive. Source encoding compresses the message into the minimum number of possible bits. And we use that in such a way that we can have a fixed message length measured in bits and get all the information that we want into that. We are definitely going to want some kind of error detection scheme, such as parity symbols or maybe a cyclic redundancy check, a CRC. I'll say more about those in a minute. We're going to have, in addition to that, some scheme for error correction. That is, we want the message to include redundant information to the extent that even if some of the you had some interference or some QSB or some of the incoming symbols for some reason were lost or corrupted, you still can figure out what the message was without any mistakes. And that means you need a detailed scheme of error correction. And there are these days error correcting codes that allow you to do that. They're very effective, very efficient. They're also highly mathematical. There's a huge literature in communication theory about this. I'm fortunate to be an emeritus faculty member at a university with a very good research library, and I've used it a lot in the engineering school, learning basically a whole new field to me, communication theory, enough so that I can at least understand how to make these codes work. Then you've got to choose a modulation type. On-off keying, of course, is the one that I talked about already, OOK. But better than that are phase shift keying or frequency shift keying or perhaps quadrature amplitude modulation, QAM. There are lots of different schemes you can use. And it turns out that almost all of the WSJT modes use some form or another of frequency shift keying, and I'll say some more details about that in a few minutes. You probably want to, at least you have the ability to choose an alphabet of possible symbols that can be sent. For example, FT8 has FT8 has 8 different possible frequencies that it transmits. That's where the 8 comes from in the name. And that means the alphabet size of the basic symbols is 8. It doesn't mean you're limited to 8 ordinary alphabet letters. It just means that that's the nature of the code. Q65 has 65 symbols, and that means, in fact, that there are 64, the alphabet of the code is 64 possible values. There's one more tone possibility that is used for sending synchronizing information that helps to synchronize the transmitter and receiver together as is necessary for proper decoding. You can choose the symbol rate, that is the rate at which you change from one symbol to the next one. It's sort of like changing the words per minute of CW, but symbol rates are important, and if you send fast, you need more bandwidth. If you slow it down, you can have narrower bandwidths. So getting more sensitivity is partly a matter of setting the symbol rate low enough that you can use a very narrow bandwidth for detecting the symbols, but high enough that you can get a reasonable information to throughput rate. And all of these things together are going to also mean it defines what the bandwidth is going to be. So that's going to be a trade-off as well. And we generally don't want to use so much bandwidth that we fill up a band. And the WSJTX modes are all fairly narrow. One of the things I wanted to do at the beginning, I had no idea it was going to become as popular as it has, by the way, but I wanted to be sure that we occupied only a small piece of each band so people don't complain that these guys are fooling around with computers and filling up all of our bands with noisy signals that we can't understand by listening to them, and et cetera. You get the point, I think. So what can these targeted these digital modes do? It turns out the reason there are a whole bunch of modes is because they're targeted for specific types of propagation. And I listed them here kind of arbitrarily, but in roughly the order in which I introduced them into the original program and then the most recent implementation of the -X program. Meteor scatter is the one I did first, and the mode was called FSK441. I crossed it out here just to indicate that mode has pretty much been superseded now by a better one called MSK144. They both were designed for meteor scatter, where you're trying to communicate with somebody on a VHF band at a distance of anywhere from 500 or 600 miles out to maybe 1,300 miles, which is the distance range at which reflections from the E layer are going to be effective. And the E layer is basically where micrometeorites burn up and cause very small but significant enhancements of the ionization that lasts for typically a fraction of a second. So we want to be able to send data fast enough that even if you only get a blip that lasts for a tenth of a second, you can exchange 2 call signs in a signal report in that amount of time. So obviously the meteor scatter modes are not slow, they're fast. FT8 in contrast is relatively slow, and Q65 is even slower. Okay. The second modes that were introduced in the programs were mainly for moon mounts. The first one was called JT65, and more recently we've converted to using a different encoding and decoding scheme. Still have 65 tones, 64 for data and 1 for sync. But it's now called Q65. I'll say more about that one. The QRP low power propagation probe that I mentioned before is WHISPER. For FT8 was designed explicitly for 6 meter DXing, but it's also extremely good at HF, and of course that's where all the huge number of users come. FT4 was a version of FT8 that was just modified so it was particularly effective for contesting. It uses shorter transmissions, so you get faster turnarounds and so forth, can build up your QSO rate. And finally, among the most recently added modes are two called FST4 and FST4W. They are explicitly designed for the bands down below the broadcast band. The medium frequency band at 630 kilohertz and the low frequency band at 137 kilohertz. Those are, a lot of people are having some fun with those, trying to do intercontinental DX on frequencies that don't really support it very well, but do work basically. And these modes are designed to make that possible and to make it effective. I should say the F in FT8 is Steve Frank, K9AN. The S in FST4 is Bill Somerville, G3WJS, who sadly died about 18 months ago. Is no longer a part of the project, obviously, but was a very significant contributor for a number of years. Okay, so I thought I'd run down just a few ideas about what I think makes these modes so popular. It is a lot of fun to be able to work the world with low power and crummy antennas, and you can do that even from an HOA limited situation. It's amazing. You can definitely boost your scores in any of the ways you like to keep it, although you won't compete with big gun stations like Whiskey 2 Zulu Quebec, where all you ever say if you're talking into the microphone is, you're 5x9 Central New Jersey. Okay. You don't exchange much more information when doing that than you do in FT8, right? Anyway. But there you've got an S9 signal, and with FT8 you don't need an S9 signal. You can have an S2 signal and get through without any trouble. These modes also are fun to use because they make possible these nearly impossible QSOs like meteor scatter or moon bounce or bouncing your signal off airplanes. The guys at 10 gigahertz have a lot of fun doing that because typical jet aircraft fly high enough that you can work people over distances of 500 miles on 10 gigahertz, and all you have to know is what the airline schedules are to know, or just point it close to an airport where you're pretty sure you'll get aircraft pretty frequently, and you get good signals reflected. And finally, I just happened to run across this comment at the bottom there, the one in blue. It was on somebody's reflector recently, where somebody described WSJTX as an arcade game. He said it was the finest arcade game in ham radio. And it is kind of like that. If you're sitting there doing FT8, like in the ARRL Digi contest, you're feeling like you're on the flippers of a pinball machine or something. It keeps you busy and whatever. It's kind of mesmerizing. Some people have fun with it that way, I think. We've talked about what it can do, and here's just a quick rundown of what these modes can do and what their target propagation applications originally were, just kind of summarize things. If you're going to do single sideband voice, you need a signal to noise ratio expressed in dB that is positive, at least by 5 dB or so, and that's really a S0 signal or S1. You can maybe make it out just about. If you've got a signal noise ratio of 10 dB or more, then you've got about an S2 signal, and probably that's enough to have a conversation if you have some repeats. Otherwise, all these other modes can, as you read down the list, can operate with even weaker signals. RTTY works pretty well down to something like -5 on this scale. I'll say something more about the scale in a minute, but these are all the same scale. MSK 144, the meteor scatter mode, that works with negative signal noise ratios expressed in dB, but only negative down to -5 or -6 or -7, maybe -8. If there's a bit of trade-off between how long the signal lasts, whether it's 1/10 of a second or 2/10 of a second, or even less than 1/10 of a second. That helps to determine how weak the signal can be. If it's a little longer, it can also be a little weaker. CW can be copied by a really good operator down to something like -10 on this scale. How does that happen with a signal weaker than the noise? Well, because the noise is always expressed in this scheme with a fixed bandwidth of about equal to the bandwidth of a single sideband receiver, 2.5 kilohertz. And obviously the CW signal is a good deal narrower than that. And if you have good ears with it sort of can pick out the tone among the noise, or if you use a narrower filter, or perhaps both, you can copy down to something like -10 or even a little bit lower. FT8 works another 10 dB below that, something more like -21 on this scale. So you can definitely work perfect copy with FT8 signals down well below the level at which you can even hear the signals. So that's just because the detection is being done in an even narrower bandwidth than your ear filters can discern. It works well. Q65 gets down into the 25, 26, 27 with 30-second transmissions, or if you transmit for a minute, more like 28, 29, 30, somewhere in that range. Most EME is done with 60-second transmissions, so copying down to the level of 28 to 30 is sort of the norm for that mode. The FST4 modes go even lower than that by a bit, and Whisper does also. And FST4W, partly because it was made to operate as a Whisper-like, beacon-like application on these low frequency and medium frequency bands, we added some really long transmissions. The -120 means 120 seconds or 2 minutes, those longer transmissions. And the 1800 one means you transmit for 30 minutes, half an hour. And you know, if all you're trying to do is find out if your signal is making it across the Pacific from California and Australia, you might use FST4W-1800. If you know that somebody's listening on the other end, he may copy that. So now I want to get to saying a little bit about the innards and how these modes work. FT8 was introduced in July of 2017. And it was primarily, I had in mind primarily multi-hop E-skip on 6 meters, where the signals fade a lot. They may sometimes be strong, but a lot of the time they're not. And even when they're strong, they fade in and out quite a bit. So we wanted to be immune to fading, at least a certain amount. We clearly were going to use the short structured messages that had already worked well in other modes in WSJT. So we're basically want to do fairly fast, minimal QSOs, exchange of signal reports, locators, call signs, and 73, and that's it. So we decided to use, as all the other WSJT modes do, use timed sequences, but in this case we made them only 15 seconds long. So you get 2 transmissions per minute and 2 receiving intervals per minute, total of 4 different sequences every minute. As I already said, this mode works well as long as the signal to noise ratio is greater than about -21, reference to the 2500 hertz noise bandwidth. And we found in practice that the mode works really well for both VHF and HF DXing. Obviously, since we're only exchanging minimal information, this is not a mode that's any good for casual chats or rag chewing or emergency communication. That's not its purpose. It's the other kind of stuff. I said it was it started to be introduced in 2017, and it took off immediately. That is a graph that was published by the outfit known as Club Log, to which you can upload your log. There was something like, in this particular plot, it starts at 2005 on the left and goes to about the middle of 2021. There were, something over 500 million QSOs in the log at that point. And for the first 15 years of this range, everybody was mostly on phone or CW, the 2 curves that are kind of orange and blue. But at the end, there was some PSK 31 activity. There is some annual RTTY contest that people get on and do RTTY. JT65 started to become used on the HF bands around, 2015, 16, and you can see that starting to creep up at the bottom there. But immediately when FT8 became available, people gave up JT65 on the HF bands and switched over to FT8. And now something like 2/3 or even a little more of all QSOs uploaded to Club Log are using the FT8 mode. And by the way, although it's not on this graph, In second place is usually FT4, and CW and phone are below that. So you can say that it changed a lot of activity in ham radio, and it certainly did. It's worth saying here that after all, not everybody uploads their log to Club Log, and these guys are mostly contesters or DXers or people that are actively keeping track of something that they like to keep score on, and all the other stuff that people do with their 2-meter FM and repeaters and all that kind of stuff, that isn't even in here. So we have no idea how that would measure on this sort of scale. So it's not an overall description of ham radio in any stretch of the imagination. But it's an amusing comment. Yeah, Gary. Just a few more words. I've already sort of alluded to this, but people sometimes ask, well, what do you mean you copy things that are weaker than the noise? That's not possible, right? And of course it isn't, except that we have to use, if we want to compare the sensitivity of different modes, we need to use a fixed reference noise bandwidth. And I took that just arbitrarily to be 2.5 kilohertz, because that's roughly the bandwidth of our single sideband radios that we're using for these modes by introducing tones into them to be transmitted. Notice that a symbol is best detected when you're trying to decode an incoming digital signal. If you use a bandwidth roughly equal to the symbol rate, the symbol rate in FT8 is 6.25 baud, 6.25 baud. That means we should use, for detecting the signal, we want to use filters in the software that are about 6.25 hertz. And if we do that, then we are gaining signal to noise ratio by 10 times the logarithm of 2500 over 6.25. That ratio is 400. The log of 400 is 400 in dB is 26 dB. So if we say we're detecting things at -21 on the signal to noise scale, that actually means add 26 to that. We're actually detecting things at about +5 signal to noise ratio. The signal is stronger than the noise in a 6.25 hertz bandwidth. Similarly for the other modes, although the bandwidth will be different. Just quickly, it's interesting to see what the actual decoding performance of FT8 is when subjected to signals that correspond to the International Telecommunications Union standard propagation modes. We have simulators that will generate FT8 signals and then subject them to simulated propagation with either AWGN, that's additive white Gaussian noise, that means no fading but just plain noise added to the signal, or with mid-latitude quiet conditions, that's pretty good conditions, or mid-latitude moderate conditions, or high-latitude moderate, and so forth and so on. And you can see as the conditions get worse, according to these ITU specifications, the sensitivity is not as good. You get down to something like -21 with a 50% probability of decoding correctly for FT8 for additive white Gaussian noise. But for high latitude moderate, you only get down to about 15 dB. Okay, those are significantly broadened and compromised signals. High latitude disturbed, by the way, down at the bottom, we didn't decode any of those after passing them through the simulator. So that's the signal propagating over the pole in crummy conditions, a lot of maybe a recent solar flare or whatever. Anyway, so we have a pretty good feeling for the sensitivity of these modes and the performance of the decoder in the full range of possible HF conditions. Now let's get down to a few more of the protocol details, the things, the nitty-gritty inside. Messages in all of the recent WSJTX modes are source encoded to exactly 77 bits. So somehow we get the information, call sign, another call sign, a grid locator, or a signal report. We have to squeeze that down so that it fits into 77 bits. I'll show you how to do that in a minute, or at least I'll overview it. We want to add a cyclic redundancy check so we can definitely detect errors and therefore flag a reception as not valid and not display it to the user. We want to have a very powerful error correction code, and for that, FT8 uses a so-called low density parity check, LDPC, low density parity check code, which uses 91 information bits, 77 of which are the message and 14 of which are the CRC, the cyclic redundancy check, okay? So that's 91, but we actually transmit 174 bits, not 91. So we've got, in addition to the 91 bits of information, we've got 83 additional bits of parity information, basically, which crosses parity back and forth between all the other bits in ways that allow the clever decoder to figure out what the message was, even if a whole bunch of those bits are wrong, are detected incorrectly. So that's where the important error correcting code comes into it. In addition, for the decoder to succeed, we need to know where the message started and where it ends. That is, we need to synchronize the received signal. The transmitting computer may be off a little bit in time, or your receiving computer might be off a little bit, or different rigs have different latencies going through the rig. You know, all that has to be basically canceled out by synchronizing the signal somehow. In FT8, we do that with an additional 21 bits, 3 7x7 Costas arrays, so-called. I'm not going to say more about those, but that means 3 additional bits. So if you take the 174, recognize that we're going to modulate this signal with 8-tone frequency shift keying so that each symbol corresponds to basically transmitting a number, 0 through 7. That's a 3-bit number, okay? That means that if we have to transmit 174 bits, divide that by 3, that means 58 different symbols have to be sent that way, and then another 21 symbols have to convey the synchronizing information. 58 and 21 makes 79, and 79 symbols is the number we're going to transmit for an FT8 transmission. We transmit them at 6.25 baud, that is 6.25 symbols per second. That means the total transmission lasts about 12.6 seconds. So it actually starts on the 15-second mark, 0, 15, 30, or 45, plus about a second, just a delay to allow for TR switching and that kind of stuff. Then it starts the transmission. So the transmission will end at about 13.6 seconds into the 15-second interval. That means the decoder can start then. It actually starts a little bit earlier because it figures, well, even if I don't copy the whole message, I got some extra time here. I might as well start on it, and if I get it right, I'll know it's right because the CRC checks out, and so I can. So when actually you see FT8 displaying its decodes on the screen, they come out in 3 bursts. The first ones, and then the second ones, and finally some third ones. All that has to do with the detailed performance in the decoder. It's worth mentioning that although the messages are structured and limited to certain formats, there still are a huge number of possible messages. Notice with 77 bits, how many different messages can you send? 2 to the 77th. That's 10 to the 23, more or less. That's, a billion is 10 to the 18. So it's 100,000 billion, if you want to start that way. Anyway, there's a huge number of possible messages. Most of them would come out looking like garbage or incorrect call signs or whatever. So the actual number that hams use is a tiny fraction of that. Okay, these structured messages, how do we fit it all into 77 bits? Turns out you can express any standard ham call sign in 28 bits. By a standard ham call sign, I mean one that has a number that for us is usually well, at least it used to be what is it? I'm trying to think of the name of what the FCC numbers 0 through 9 used to mean. Call areas, right. A senior moment here, I think. Of course, we're scattered all over the continent now. But in any case, we have that number in our call sign, and so does every other ITU nation have that number in a call sign. But then there can be 2 more characters before that, 1 or 2, but it can be 1 or 2, and those can be either letters or numbers, except you never have all 3 numbers. So at least one of the characters before the call area number has to be a letter. And then following that, you can have 1 or 2 or 3 letters in the suffix. And I think we even allowed for the King of Jordan, whose call sign is JH1, I think. It doesn't have any suffix. So the characters after the number are always letters or a blank. If it's only a 2-character suffix like mine, the 3rd character is a blank. So, I mean, anyway, that's how you can do it, and you can just basically multiply up all those possibilities. 27 times 27 times 27, that takes care of the suffix. 10 takes care of the call area, 0 through 9. And then I think it's 37 for the other 2, because they can be either letters or numbers or a blank. So 26 letters and 10 numbers and a blank, that's 37. Anyway, multiply all those numbers together, and you find out that's a number that's 260 something million, I think, but it's slightly less than 2 to the 28th. So that's why 28 bits is enough. Okay. A similar kind of argument goes for the locator. 2 letters and 2 numbers. The letters can be up to from A through R. The numbers are 0 through 9, and all of that can fit into 15 bits of information, and that makes 71. And then we have 6 additional bits that we, in these modes, use to define the message type, which could be 2 standard call signs and a locator, as illustrated here, but it could also be a free text message. That means the message type is different. And an example of the free text message is shown down there at the bottom. Anything that you can say in 13 letters and numbers and spaces, you can send as a free text message. That's a different message type. The free text actually is encoded in 71 bits. That's what sets 13 as the maximum number. Okay, so just a few more words about the other possible message types. There's the standard one, the one that's shown in blue there. There's free text, anything maximum 13 characters. We have a scheme that allows sending non-standard call signs that may have, funny extra numbers or 4 letters or a bunch of other things that you can have. Anything up to 10 characters can be sent. That takes something more like 52 bits, I think it is, as I remember correctly. So there's not anywhere near enough room to send 52 bits of that plus 28 bits for the other call sign. So instead, for the other call sign, when you send a non-standard call sign, we actually send only a hash code for the other call sign, which must have therefore already been copied in full. And if you send the hash code of, I think it's 12 bits, or I may be remembering that wrong. It might be 15 bits. Whatever we send, if the receiver recognizes that I've already seen that hash code before and I know whose call it is, then it can display the actual call sign. So QSOs with a non-standard call, they work, but they're a little clumsy. If you're going on a de-expedition, get the licensing authority to make you a real call sign. It works a lot better for FT8. Okay, then there are special modes for what we call the Fox and Hound mode. I'm not going to say more about that today. For field day, for various contests, and for arbitrary telemetry. Some of the guys that are sailing party balloons up with a whisper transmitter on them and sending them around the world, which they've succeeded in actually making 2 circuits. And maybe Joe Biden shot one of them down once, I think we heard. but anyway, they use this telemetry mode to just send arbitrary information, or they can define whatever the 71 bits mean. They typically send altitude and temperature and what the battery condition is and so forth and so on. Okay, many of you have played with the program, and probably with FT8 in particular. Of course, the waterfall often looks something like that. You got lots of signals. If you tune to 14074 on 20 meters, that's typically the kind of thing you'll see. The way I've shown it here, the horizontal green lines up among all the signals are spaced 15 seconds apart, so I'm just monitoring the band here, receiving a whole bunch of signals. You can see the average spectrum down at the bottom of the most recently displayed one. Notice that the edges of the green line at the bottom, the average spectrum line, those edges look really steep. These signals are closely confined by design to not have sidebands that go out a long way. In particular, I became aware of the fact that typical radio teletype signals, RTTY signals, are really ugly. This is what they look like. That's again, the waterfall at the top and the average spectrum below it. At the left is a radio teletype signal, a standard RTTY signal, as you would receive it from a strong station over the air. On the right, the first of those three signals on the right is an FT8 signal as it was designed originally in 2017. That was in WSJTX version 2.0. In version 2.1, we decided to make the signal a lot cleaner, and we started using, instead of standard frequency shift keying, where the phase of the signal is maintained constant when you shift from one tone to the next, but the frequency shifts abruptly. In the mode that we use now in FT8 and FT4, is called Gaussian frequency shift keying. That means that instead of shifting instantaneously from one tone to the next tone, we just kind of shift it over slowly. And that means much, much lower sidebands. In fact, you can make the sidebands almost arbitrarily steep. And as you can see, both FT8 and FT4 now have extremely good sharp spectra. So let's just summarize quickly. I should wind this up and give some chance for discussion, and I haven't even gotten to Q65 yet, which I'm going to go through a lot more quickly than I did for FT8. Good features of FT8 are that it means there's a meeting place on each band, so you don't have to tune around much. You basically tune your single sideband receiver to the standard frequency, like 14074. You open up the receiving filters to something like 3 kilohertz if you have got control over that. 2.5 kilohertz is enough, but 3 is even better. And then FT8 will decode all the signals that show up in the passband. The decoder is, as I say modestly, is really good. It can dig down into the noise, and it'll give you reliably at least a 50% chance of decoding a signal if it's as weak as minus 21 dB. If you already have copied this, the call sign, say, of the station you're working, so that you can use so-called a priori information in the decoder, then that's AP, that's what that stands for. Then you can get about 3 dB more, because you know if he's already sent you his your call sign, his call sign, and maybe his locator, his next transmission, he's going to send you the same 2 call signs and a signal report, or maybe a Roger and a signal report. So really all the decoder has to do is figure out the third things, and it can at least guess that the first 2 are what you expect. It checks to make sure they are what you expect, but you can allow more errors in the received information and still have an extremely low rate of false decodes. In fact, false decodes virtually never show up, or very seldom turn up in any of these modes. And you don't get partial copy. You never get one letter and a call sign wrong. It'll either give you the whole thing or it gives you nothing. And that means you don't have busted call signs in a contest unless you made a human error. You get exactly what was transmitted. Oh, finally, the little blue note down at the bottom there. Since these signals are carefully structured and the messages are structured, once I've decoded the signal, I know exactly what the waveform of the transmitted signal was. The decoder could subtract that waveform from the received total wideband audio data, subtract the one decoded signal, and then see if there's anything else maybe under that signal at the same frequency. And frequently that happens, and if you watch the decoder in FT8, you'll often see two signals at the same frequency. It decodes the stronger one first, typically, subtracts it, and then looks to see if there's anything else there. And if there is, it sometimes even goes 3 deep. Recently, during a couple of de-expeditions, people were emailing us, telling us the program was crashing, and it turned out the reason was because they were decoding more than 100 signals in 3 kilohertz. And we had somewhat arbitrarily said there'll never be 100 decodable signals there. So there was a fixed limit to the array size somewhere. And so it's now 200. So don't try to decode 200 signals, it'll crash. What else? I think, what about limitations of FT8? There obviously are lots of limitations too, even though people have a lot of fun with it. The information transfer is minimal. All these signals on a wide band and everybody's concentrated in one tiny little sliver, does that possibly make good sense? Well, up for a while it did because it made it easy to find people, but once that 3 kilohertz band gets very full, as it is on 10 meters these days when the band is open worldwide, some wider spectral slices would be a good idea. There is actually an IARU band planning committee working on this. Also, keep in mind that during the time we've been doing these things, SDR technology has come along with wideband receivers, and computers have gotten a lot faster, so the things we could do 5 or 10 years ago now are so easy that we could obviously do it in a much wider band and it would still work. So probably in future we'll make it possible to do these things on a wider bandwidth. So the second example, I'm going to go through this one relatively quickly, Q65. Again, we use structured messages. This time we use only a 12-bit cyclic redundancy check because that worked out well in the overall design of the code. We use this time not a low-density parity check code, but rather a so-called Q-ary, Q-ARY, like binary or tertiary, but Q-ary means with an alphabet size of Q. Here, Q equals 64 is the alphabet size. So this is a Q-ary repeat accumulate code. That's what it's defined as in the communications literature. And anyway, we have a 6313 code. That means we start out with 13 message symbols. These are now 64, one of 64 tones are going to be transmitted. So these are 6-bit symbols rather than 3-bit symbols. 6 times 13 is 78. So we can fit the 77-bit message in there. We actually have a free bit that we can use for something else, which so far is undefined, but we'll probably use it someday. What else? So the modulation is 65 tone frequency shift keying. We use 22 sync symbols. So in addition to the 63 information carrying symbols and parity symbols, we have 22 more sync tone symbols. And all of that means 85 symbols altogether. For example, in the 60-second transmission length submodes for Q65, we send the symbols at a rate of 1.66 per second. So that means if you divide 85 by 1.66, you get the transmission length is about 52 seconds. So transmission length is just a little bit under a minute so that you can have a few seconds to do the decoding and turn around and so forth. Oh, I was starting to say Q65 has a lot of submodes because we had a lot of target applications in mind. Basically, this Q-ary repeat accumulate code works very well for rapidly fading messages, rapidly fading transmissions. So any kind of transmission which has rapid, scattered signals for some reason, scattered from the surface of the moon, scattered from an aircraft, scattered from a rain cloud, those kinds of things all yield well to Q65 types of modulation. So here's an example of WSJTX running a Q65 EME QSO. Again, you'll see the waterfall at the top. It's set up here with a total bandwidth of a little under 3 kilohertz. So you can see the fairly wide signal, the fairly bright stripe at 1500 hertz, right about in the middle. That's the sync tone. So the sync tone is bright enough that you can pick it out. That means the sync tone will always appear exactly 22 times in the 52-second transmission. And then the other tones are spread out over 64 other frequency intervals. And since there are roughly the same number of symbols as there are, the same number of information symbols as there are possible frequencies, there's only about one in each of the possible frequency channels. So you don't see much of anything in the average, but in the average you see the sync signal very, very brightly. So it's easy to pick out these signals by clicking on the sync tone, and the decoder will take care of the rest of it for you. Not going to say more about this here, but what I will end up by doing is describing some of the differences between the different submodes and why sort of different choices of the transmission duration, which can be 15, 30, 60, 120, or 300 seconds, transmissions of even as long as 5 minutes. We haven't found those all that useful, but a few people have played with them, and they do work well, but it takes a long time to make a QSO if every transmission is 5 minutes. So most of the time, people on EME are using 1-minute transmissions. We got used to that with JT65. It was actually used for CW, at least on the lower EME bands, for several decades, even before digital EME came along. On 6 and 2 meters, people use primarily Q65-60A. That is the 60-second submode with the tones closely spaced together. But at higher frequencies, say 432, we use the B mode. At 1296, we use the C mode. Here, the tones are sped out twice as far for the B mode, 4 times as far for the C mode, 8 times as far for the D mode, and so forth. And the reason you want to spread the tones out is if there is enough modulation on the tones caused by the propagation mode, such as Doppler spread caused by reflections from different parts of the surface of the moon as the moon is rotating, those will spread out the tones, and you want to have the decoder be able to separate the different tones one from another, so you want them spread more widely apart. For ionospheric scatter on 6 meters, Q65 works really well. I think the most popular submode by far is -30A, 30-second transmissions in the A spacing. But a few people have also had fun with using 2-minute transmissions in a much wider spacing. They just discovered that they can actually work people at a distance of 800 to 1,000 miles with really low power, 5 watts or so. You just let it run, and Q65 decodes it. You can't hear the signals at all, but they pop right up. And that means when 6 meters is not open, we're not talking about sporadic E when signals get really strong. We're talking about dead band conditions. Transequatorial propagation, when you're working South Americans from North America, and likewise from Europe and Africa and so forth, works very well with the Q65 modes, but here you want fairly wide space tones, because even rather like high latitude disturbed propagation, transequatorial propagation always has, when you're listening to a CW signal, you hear that kind of flutter on the signal. That's this kind of broadening of the tones. For 10 gigahertz EME, people are using wide bands, wide separation modes as well. Different modes, propagation modes, map very nicely into different Q65 submodes. And I'm going to finish this with a couple of very quick comments about the use of Q65 at our own club station, W2ZQ. We're normally set up with 2 fairly large monitors, and that screenshot there is both monitors left to right. And I've got displayed on it both WSJTX, which has 3 different sub-windows. The familiar one that has the waterfall on the decodes and so forth, plus one over on the right-hand screen, which has information having to do with tracking the moon and Doppler shifts and so forth, and another one to the left of the main screen, which is called the station activity window. it's called the active stations window, which contains a list on it of stations which the wideband decoding program known as QMAP has decoded over the full range of frequencies used for EME on the 1296 megahertz band. So QMAP is to 1296 EME like MAP65 was for 2 meter EME. It gives you a receiving capability over the full span of 90 kilohertz in which almost all the digital EME activity will be taking place. So the next couple of slides will show you close-ups of those things. On the left-hand monitor, again, there are these 3 screens. The one on the left is QMAP, and I'm going to say more about that in a second. The second one, the smaller one, is the active stations window, and then the main WSJTX windows are on the right. And the right-hand monitor looks like this. You've got the wideband waterfall down at the bottom, in which if you're I think if you have a pretty good view of that screen, you can pick out easily 8 different EME signals, and what is there, 4 different minutes of reception intervals there displayed. So you're actually seeing what the activity has been on the band over from 1296.035 to about 1296.125, about 90 kilohertz of spectrum, and signals back and forth talking to each other. And I think maybe I was working somebody at the time, so that's in here as well. Here's what the QMAP main window looks like. All the signals in a given minute are divided by the dashed horizontal line across the middle. So in the most recent minute, down at the bottom there are 6 different signals decoded. DF3RU is calling CQ. IQ2DB is talking to us, W2ZQ. IK2DDR is working KA6U. And somebody else is calling KA6U. He must have just called CQ. He's got 2 callers there. We're decoding them both. And a couple other signals. There's a PA1 and a KB2SA in California is calling CQ. So you basically can see all of the activity taking place at the same time that you're actually, and those decodes are all copied over from the QMAP decodes into the WSJTX active stations window. And if you want to work one of those guys, all you do is click on him, and WSJTX will then QSY to his frequency, offset by the calculated Doppler shift, so that you'll come up right where he expects you to come up, and you work him. And signals on EME are weak, but they're predictable. So we always know that we can work these guys because we have about the same size dish most of them have, maybe a little smaller than some of them, but we've got enough power, and basically if we can hear them, we can work them. They're a lot of fun. The final thing I want to end up with then is just saying a few things about the programmer details. Some of you, I'm sure, do these things yourselves. The user interface in WSJTX is all written in C++. It uses the so-called Qt or Qt framework for the various widgets and so forth that make up the controls on the graphical user interface. Most of the decoding and the number crunching is actually done in Fortran. Some people laugh. It's an old but honorable language. It's one that I can code in my sleep, and it's basically it's still the mode of choice for a lot of scientific and engineering programming, not least because there's such a huge available accumulation of good code written in that language over a period of, what is it now, going back to 1960 or so. So it's 80 years worth of development. 60 years, I guess that means, doesn't it? The core development team these days, I mentioned Bill Somerville already, G3WJS, sadly no longer with us, but Steve Frank is K9AN. Nico Palermo is the brains behind the Q65 internal code, and that was a very nice addition to the program about, I forget how many years ago now, 4 or 5. Uwe Risa, DG2YCB, as a recent addition to the core group, as is Brian Moran, N9ADG. And both of them, UVA is good with a number of things, but has been useful contributions to the user interface and to basically just a lot of help in getting the program new modes out when we're ready to do that. And Brian is especially helpful with things having to do with de-expedition operators using the Fox and Hound mode and with contest operations, that sort of thing. So all the code is available to anyone. You can download it, you can play with it, you can build it yourself. Although building is not a trivial operation, you can do it entirely with free tools. We use only stuff that you can download and use for free. And it's all licensed under the General Public License version 3 of the so-called GNU, the Free Software Foundation that started up around MIT some years ago. So it's licensed under that code. That means that anybody can use it, they can modify it, they do whatever they want with it for themselves. If they want to give it to other people as well, they have to license their code also under the GPL version 3. So it helps to, we really wanted this to be something that would potentially outlive any of us and be usable by others in the future. And as I get well into my 9th decade, I'm very aware of the fact that I won't be here in 10 years, most likely, and whatever. So we'd like some of these things to last longer if people are having fun with them. So that's the command at the bottom that you need if you want to use the so-called Git program, the version control system, to download the code for yourself. So I've talked probably too long, and it's time to turn things over to anybody in the room that wants to ask questions, and we'll try then to get people.
All right, guys, that's where we are cutting it off because there's like another 20 minutes of esoteric Q&A. I thought he did a really nice job on this. As I learned a lot here. Hope everybody else enjoyed this. And I've got a clicker. I can click things. For those that want to look at this presentation again or to see the Q&A, the full presentation can be gotten from this QR code. Oops, sorry. Everybody got that wants it? Yes. Oh, got one more back here. Yeah, we'll have it on the YouTube video so you can just kind of get to it there as well. Thank you, Lance. All right, it's that time. Does anybody have new business for the club? Please say no, because we're running late. No new business. All right, let's get to the announcement, the last of the announcements. Got one new thing. Lance reminded me. I forgot to include it in the slide deck. Lance has been working on our Facebook group page and has created a group within our Facebook page. The group will allow us to actually hold some discussions and everything if you would like to do so within the Facebook format. So just look for the MARC Facebook group. You can get to it from our Facebook page. Just request to join. There'll be a really, really short questionnaire. What kind of silly things do we ask, Lance? Call sign, name, and will you abide by the one policy statement we have, which is be a nice human being. So yeah, and the MARC will be in parentheses, so make sure you search for it that way. Otherwise, it may not show up. So we've got the MARC information net every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. That's on our 2-meter repeater. The MARC simplex net. Robert, you're still on track for this. Okay, we are changing the start time of the MARC simplex net on Mondays to 8 p.m. I'll be taking the time to update all of the notifications on Group IO and Ham Club Online for that this week. So we should be good to go there. So please, if you do the simplex net 30 minutes earlier than you're used to. Breakfast at IHOP on Saturdays, every Saturday. It says 7:30, but frankly, our waitress was saying, y'all are here like at 10 minutes to 7, but we don't let her take orders till 7:30. So if you get there, it's any time by 7:30, you'll be assured of getting your order taken. So it's a good time. We get a lot of good participation. So please come. Also, we've not been publicizing our sidewalk sale because it's been winter and it's not been really conducive to standing outside selling stuff. Well, we had a really good group at the sidewalk sale this past Saturday. No, it was the Saturday before. Yeah, 2 Saturdays ago. But last Saturday of every month, we do intend to have a sidewalk sale at the Collin College in the library parking lot. I don't know about anybody else, but I've got more more valuable items to carry out there. We had about 1, 2, 3, 4. We had 5 people selling this last month. Hopefully we'll keep that up. So let's make a point of being out there. You can get there after breakfast because we don't start till 9 at the sidewalk sale. And you don't have to stay long, but I mean, I know I'm going to have some stuff that may be of interest to some folks. I'm sure other people will be bringing things too. All right. If nobody has anything else, can I have a motion to adjourn? We've got Kiri doing the motion. We'll do Mike for the second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right.